Hello, hi everybody. I hate using these, Sam. I have to use it, don't I? Oh no, it's easier for people to hear. And also the reason we are actually using this is that we want to actually sort of record, what people actually say, so we don't miss anybody. Well, hi, and thanks for asking me to sort of chair this one. Just a bit of introduction. My name's Kevin Dixon. I'm a volunteer. I'm actually the chair of Health Watch in Torquay, or Torbay. So I sort of volunteer to do this one because I think it's really important that we actually sort of gather patients' feedback to look into the strategic transformation plan. A bit of personal background, I've never actually worked for the NHS, so that makes me supremely ignorant about what's going on. But the way I actually sort of got into Health Watch is because I was a carer. Now, my dad was disabled for 20 years, and for the last 6 years of his life, he needed sort of 24-hour care. So I actually sort of got involved with Mum in looking after Dad. And the other reason, and I'm eternally grateful for all the things that the NHS did for us, and the other reason that I got involved in Health Watch, which monitors and tries to improve health and social care, is, and I'm not going to take my shirt off, but if I did, I've got a whacking grey scar right down my tummy here. So the NHS saved my life, so thanks, guys. And that was Torbay Hospital. I know it wasn't you personally, so there's a bit of an age thing going on here. But the NHS saved my life, so I'm absolutely and utterly passionate about the NHS. That's why I put so much time in. So I'm a volunteer. I'm not paid to be here. My role really is to try and help the meeting progress and try and make it run on time. So I wanted to do a couple of the sort of facilities things first, just so everybody knows. Fire escapes are through the magic curtain over there, halfway up the stairs. Toilets are just down there on the right. And that's pretty much what I wanted to say. The reason we've actually sort of laid it out like this, rather than the sort of rows, is that when we've actually sort of spoken to members of the public before, people have said they feel more comfortable in actually chatting in smaller groups rather than sort of big auditorium. And as I said, I actually don't like using these things, but it's just a way of recording what's going on. So that's why I'm here, and if I can just move straight into our speakers.
Good afternoon, everyone. The mic works, so that's a good start. Just as a brief introduction, my name is Phil Mante. I am part of the executive team at Derriford Hospital. So I'm really pleased to be here today to talk to you all about this thing called a sustainability and transformation plan. So the way we're going to run the session is we're not going to talk at you for too long because we really want to hear what you think. So I'll give you a really brief background to this thing called the STP to give a bit of context. Then my colleague Rob will take us through the very specific thing around hospital services. That's the thing we're really interested to hear your opinion about, particularly today. So what we want to do is get from you guys, when we're trying to assess scenarios and make decisions to propose to you, what are the things that are really important to you when we're assessing these options? So just try and keep that in mind a little bit when we're going through the session, if that's okay. So obviously, we want to hear from you. We'll explain a little bit as well about how we'll use your views as well. And we want to sort of talk to you about how you want to stay involved in this as well, because it's quite complicated. It's a little bit daunting. And for those of us that have worked in the health service for 10 years plus, like me, it's a bit daunting as well. So I appreciate that when we come and talk to you guys about these things, we need to lay them out as sort of in a way which is as easy to relate to as possible. And if we're not doing that, we need to know that. So, I won't labour the point, because you may have heard of these STPs before, but Devon is one of 44. This is something that all health areas in England have to participate in. The boundaries are pretty much dictated to us all about how we have to work together. My next slide will actually explain who's working together, who's in this sustainability and transformation plan. But it's really necessary, not just because of all of the money things that you'll have heard in the news recently. I mean, you can't have missed that. It's more than that, actually. It's more about how can we all work together to provide the best possible experience for our patients, the best outcomes for our patients. And yes, of course, money is a factor in that too. But even if we didn't have a financial pressure, we should be working together to provide those things. And some of them are covered there in those bottom bullet points. So integrating health and social care, easy thing to say, big thing to do. but that's one of the aims. It's inescapable that it's great that we're all living longer, but actually that puts different pressures on the services that we're looking for. And actually, there's more demand. It's not just about people living longer and living sort of better. Actually, there's more demand as well in the system. And you can't ignore technology. So we live in a world where there's some very clever things happening with lots of technology, and actually we need to look at how we can make a better use of that by talking to patients about how we can deliver care in a different way to the way we have in the past. So that's just a very quick background to the STP. Now, this is the Devon STP. So all of these organisations are trying to come together to create one single vision. So what have we got here? We've got 4 big hospitals. So one in Barnstaple, one in Exeter, one in Torquay, and one in Plymouth. We've got 2 clinical commissioning groups. So the parts of the NHS that are responsible for sort of setting out contracts for services that need to be provided. We've got 2 mental health providers in here. So we've got the Devon Partnership Trust, but we've also got Live Well South West, who not only are a provider of mental health in the Plymouth area, they're also a social enterprise. So they're a charity, effectively, which means they're, again, a different type of organisation. So you've got an ambulance trust as well as 3 local authorities. So the type of complexity that you can imagine in all those conversations, we need to sweep through and do the best that we can for our patients and our population. And that's going to be a challenge, but that's something that people like me just have to sort of get on with and meet face on, and not let organisational boundaries get in the way of what's in the best interests of the people we're here to serve. And of course, there are some key partners as well in all of this. So you guys, you know, you're really key in all of this. You're not only representing organisations, but you're also patients as well. You're part of the public. You've got an interest in this. But we've also got some private providers that provide healthcare in our STP area. So you've got a company like Care UK it's an independent provider, but it provides operations and healthcare. And you've got 160 different GP practices who don't have one single voice. So our challenge is to try and get all of this corral together to come up with the best possible offering for our patients. So what I'm going to do now is just show you a video. I think it's about 6 minutes, 5 minutes, so we've cut it down. So what that'll do is stop me talking at you and give you a few sort of snippets about, so why do we need to do this? So I'll just run through this and then we can pick up again afterwards. Oh, okay. First technical glitch, sorry. Oh, hold on. I think we're okay. Looks like we've still got a sound problem. In the intervening period, maybe it's a good idea that we just introduce the rest of the panel to you. Maybe we should have done that at the beginning. So I'll stop talking because I've got the mic on, and I'll ask my colleagues to introduce themselves.
So my name's Dr. Sheila McCormick. I'm a GP in Plymouth. I work for New Devon CCG for the Western locality, and I'm a clinical commissioning lead. My portfolio stretches from children, young people, maternity, right through to mental health and dementia. So quite a wide portfolio.
Hi, and I'm Rob Dyer. I'm the medical director at Torbay Hospital, which is part of Torbay and South Devon Foundation Trust, which runs not just the hospital but all the community services which cover the whole of South Devon, right up to your border really with Dartmouth and Chillington. And I was a consultant in diabetes endocrinology at Torbay Hospital for 19 years, and then have moved into this management position. So, and I've sort of stepped into this position in Phil Hughes's place. Phil is the medical director at Plymouth at Derriford Hospital, and he couldn't be here today. But actually, it's not for a place that's sort of on the border between the two areas. Maybe it's not such a bad thing to have a view from South Devon as well as the western part.
Okay. I'm going to go rogue and try it again, see if it works. No. Okay. Okay, which is a real shame, but actually what I think we should do is probably just continue. Okay. So what I'd like to do is come back to that once we've got it sorted, because it is actually a pretty good bit of material. So back to me then. So what are we trying to achieve? So everything that we are trying to do needs to come back to this triple aim. So this is really what we're holding ourselves to, and we're sort of considering all the different things that we can do to help the sort of improve the population's sort of health needs. And it's all about improving health and well-being, delivering safe and high quality care, and of course, there is the piece about making sure that we are spending the money that we are given as wisely and as effectively as possible. So there are some things within there that are clear around, we've already mentioned, sort of we're all getting older. You can't kind of escape that, and demands are higher. But we've also recognised, and you would have got this from the video, and you'll get it later, that there are some health inequalities across the wider Devon. That's really, really important to us. We know that one size doesn't fit all, and we know actually that we've got to address some real areas of differences across the county, as well as improving the overall standard. We've also recognised that there is variability around the quality of care provided. So Rob will probably get into that a little bit more when he talks about the hospital services that we're going to be talking to you about today. Really, really big thing. Mental health is just as important as physical health. That's a really, really strong thing in this STP that we have a vision for. And I don't think you can say that enough, frankly. And you'll all probably be familiar with the work that's already happened around community hospitals, and that has all sort of flown from the idea that for a number of patients, if not all, it won't be all because it's appropriate for some patients to be in a hospital bed, being in your own environment is best for you if you're appropriately supported. So, I do need to mention the money. And there is a scenario that says, if we don't get any more money than we currently have, and we continue to do things the way that we do, and demand increases in the way that we think that it will, then by that financial year there, 2021, there's going to be a gap between the money that we have available to us in a totality against the money that we're spending to deliver care of a pretty big, horrible number. So yes, it's there as a driver, but actually these other things are equally as important. There is an issue as well about how resources are spent across the county. So just as there is an issue about health inequality across the county, there is a recognised issue about how resources are spread across the county. That is something that we will address during this piece of work. So the case for change as well is helpful in the video, but these are the 7 priority areas for the STP. As I say, you'll be familiar probably with the number 2, which is the integrated care consultation that's happened in the east of the county recently. But what we're here, particularly as I mentioned at the start, to talk to you about today is the acute hospital and specialised services part of the plan. And again, I just want to say we're really interested in your views about what's important to you and what you think is important to patients and those that you represent when we're thinking about how can we do things differently. So I think at this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Rob, and he will talk us through the specific areas around hospital services. Okay. Yeah, can you unplug me? 'Cause I can't see.
Right, thank you, Phil. I need to use both hands, don't I? So, I guess I can try to fill in some of the detail that was in the video in terms of the case for change through this slide. So, as Phil mentioned, there's increasing pressure on our systems. The demand on hospitals, as you'll hear from the news almost every night over the last couple of months, seems to be getting greater and greater. This is partly a recognition of the success of the NHS in a sense. People are living longer and have healthier lives, but then getting into older age, and it's not just older people, there are people around with chronic conditions who require quite a lot of support in later years. And so there is increasing pressure. We have an older population in Devon than in the rest of the country, and therefore that in itself can bring pressures with it. So there's an increasing need for, is that point? So there's an increasing need for treatment, and that without changing the way we do things will increase the time that people have to wait for treatment. And clearly that's not what we want to happen. The hospital services that we have now were designed quite a long time ago, and with a model which was very much based around beds in hospitals. And over the years, even before the financial difficulties that we're now experiencing, there's been a general change so that people with medical conditions spend much less time in hospital nowadays than they did. And we're moving care from hospital-based to day case or to outpatient. And as Phil mentioned, the community integration consultation that's been going on is really about trying to provide more care that was previously provided in hospitals in a patient's own home or in a bed in the community. We do have new standards, and all the time there are increasing requirements upon us as health providers and social care providers to provide better care and safer care, and that's of course absolutely right. But that has an influence over the model of care that we provide, and it means that some of the things that we used to do are no longer acceptable. There are new drugs and new treatments which are increasing the pressure on services, both in terms of the number of people that we need to see, but also in terms of the cost of those drugs and treatments. But of course, for the patients that benefit from them, that's a really good thing, and we have to find a way of affording those treatments. The effect of all this is that, unfortunately, we are starting to fail to meet the NHS targets that are set. I think the NHS targets are set to drive to try to reduce the variation in care that can happen otherwise. And in the most part, they are very sensible and they are absolutely the right thing to achieve those standards. And we are struggling to achieve those across the whole of Devon. There are some variations, but we're all struggling to achieve the A&E 4-hour target, and we're all struggling to achieve the times the access time that is required for us to see patients in outpatients, and in particular patients with either suspected or proven cancer. So we really do have to change the way we work to get back on track. Lastly here, possibly one of the biggest drivers is actually a difficulty with staff. Medical staff is probably the most acute problem that we have in Devon. This is a reflection of a national problem, but some of the difficulties are worse in Devon than they are in some parts of the country. And that's particularly an issue when you consider the requirement, which again is absolutely the right thing to do, to move towards providing emergency services and urgent care services on a 7-day basis rather than Monday to Friday. So most of the reviews of services that have been initiated have been put forward because we are struggling with staff and most commonly medical staff, but there are some other areas, for example, community nurses, where we're also having difficulty. And in the future, it's projected that we may have even problems with midwives and so forth. So all of these things together are meaning that we really have to find a different way of working. Now, the question is, where do you start? And we have chosen to start with those services that we think are most risky. And in some senses, that's because they are big and important. But that doesn't mean that they're the only services that are going to be looked at. So the services that we are reviewing at the moment are at the top here, the hospital urgent and emergency care services. So that includes the A&E departments in each of the present 4 hospitals, the big hospitals. And it also includes the medical and surgical emergency services that are required to support that A&E department. One of the key things to remember is that departments and hospitals are highly interdependent, so you can't run an A&E department without the other hospital services to support that and to take on the ongoing care of patients once they move out of the department. The second one that we're looking at is stroke services, and that's a reflection of the fact that there are variations in the way stroke patients are treated across Devon, and there are some particular issues because of the geography. And the third one is maternity paediatrics and neonatology, which is newborn babies. I'm actually leading that one. Each of these reviews has one of the medical directors from each of the 4 acute hospitals leading it, and we are leading them on behalf of all of our medical director colleagues, and I'm leading that maternity paediatrics and neonatology one. So we'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. The first one I mentioned was, this is my colleague Adrian Harris, who's the medical director at the Royal Devon and Exeter Hospital, and he's leading the urgent and emergency care review. I've already mentioned the fact that there's a requirement to meet new standards for 7-day services and to see patients within a very short time of admission if they're very ill. Staffing shortages are becoming quite critical in some parts of Devon, and that's resulting in an inability to meet the peaks in attendance in our A&E departments, with a difficulty in meeting that 4-hour wait. As I mentioned before, we're also seeing greater numbers of very sick people with complex needs. The second service is for stroke, and this is George Thompson, my colleague from North Devon. He's leading that review. There's a real problem with staffing in the stroke units in Devon, and of course that's the opposite is the case in terms of the demand. So the demand's going up as the staffing has been going down, and we have a lot of older patients who have often other complex medical problems. We do have slightly different approaches across the hospitals, and that's leading to difference in outcome for stroke, and one of our aims is to reduce that variation in the care that people get across Devon. With stroke care, one of the key things is to get to hospital as quickly as possible. And of course, the geography is quite challenging in that sense. It's very different living in Devon if you have a stroke and to living in a major city where you may just have to cross 2 or 3 miles of the city to get to the nearest hospital. And that reflects the fact that the outcome from stroke treatment is very much dependent on how quickly you get to the right treatment. And then, apologies for the photograph, as I said, I'm leading the maternity and paediatrics review. And again, the problem here is medical shortages. So when we started the review, the feeling amongst the staff was initially, isn't this all about the money? Well, in fact, even however much money we had, we would still have a problem because we can't attract medical staff to work in our services. And the result of that is that we end up using quite a lot of agency staff. That causes a problem with quality sometimes, because if you've got temporary staff, you can't be sure that the quality of service will be the same. And of course, it's more expensive. So it's a problem. We are have been, because of the difficulties with the permanent staff, there's a problem with reduction in trainees that we can take on in the area, which will compound shortages in the future. So training and providing an environment for good training is an absolutely key part of our strategy. Equally important is this issue at the bottom here, that the Better Births report from which was produced a couple of years ago is suggesting that across the whole of Britain we need more choice for women who are having a baby about the environment in which they have the baby. And there is big variation, big variation across Devon in the availability of alternatives to the standard hospital environment. And again, we have problems with patients with more complex needs. So that hopefully gives you an idea about the reason that we're doing these reviews and a bit more detail about the precise areas that we're looking at. It's important to say that the reviews are ongoing, so we don't have outcomes of these reviews as yet. But I can, if people are interested, I can describe a little bit about the topics of conversation that are going on. And I think that's the point that I hand back to you, Phil, isn't it? Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. So, we need to know what you think about how we assess the options that we're going to come up with around the services that Rob talked about. So, so what we've got at the moment is these service areas. We've got groups of clinicians coming together from each of the sort of hospital sites. We've got patient representatives involved in those discussions as well. Obviously, I'm a novice at these things. So what we've got is some working groups looking at all the options, and they need to be informed by what you think about these assessment criteria. Or they need to be thinking about further assessment criteria that you think's missing from this. So this is one of the things that we want to have a discussion with you about once we've got to the end of this initial opening bit and have some questions and answers. So I don't want to labour the point because we've got time to talk about it. There's material on the desks that you're sat at as well. The assessment form as well, where we're asking for feedback, is structured around this assessment criteria as well. But to help us make good recommendations, we need to know what the important things are around these factors, or if something's missing. So that's the kind of end of our introductory piece that hopefully has given you a bit of detail about the STP at a big level, but really importantly, the things about our local hospital, acute hospital services.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thank you very much. Any questions?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it Nick, isn't it? Yeah. Go on. Use that one. So it'll...
I noticed on page 8 of the STP for wider Devon leaflet. Okay, page 8. It says to improve population health and well-being. Third bullet point. It says improve outcomes for people with 2 or more long-term conditions. Does that exclude people with just 1?
Thanks.
Hi. No, of course we want outcomes and quality of life to improve for everybody with long-term conditions. I think the reason for specifying 2 or more is because those people are the individuals. Many people with 1 long-term condition live with that condition and look after themselves and have good quality of life. As you start to get 2 or 3 or 4 long-term conditions, that becomes much harder. And those are people for whom quality of life can deteriorate quite rapidly. And they also are people who don't do well in our current system. So they tend to, if we're not careful, they can bounce around between different hospital specialties and they can end up in and out of hospital quite frequently, which is a poor experience for them, and it's very expensive for the health service too. So that's the reason that they're focused on people with multiple long-term conditions.
The first question was to do with something I noticed immediately. The other question is to do with my specific field. I run a voluntary car service. Pardon me? Really close to my mouth, okay. So I run a voluntary car service in Kingsbridge, and I'm wondering, the cost sometimes seems excessive insofar as we have 4 or 5 volunteers who travel 4 or 5 times per day to Derriford or Torbay or Exeter. And I'm wondering if a cost saving couldn't be achieved by postcode appointing. So if you issue appointments to your patients by postcode, so that we could shuttle a full car or a minibus of people to the hospital, reducing the cost, especially for people on benefits, pension credits, things like that, that actually cost the NHS on average £35 per journey. So if we've got 15 people a day costing the NHS £35 per day each, and that's just one car service. There are quite a large number of car services throughout Devon, but that could be one way of achieving a significant cost saving.
It's a nice idea, but we do try and give our patients choice about where they go. And I think also we need to be very aware that for older patients who are attending appointments, having a very long day at hospital whilst they wait for their other passengers to have their appointments can actually be really stressful and very tiring and could actually lead to deterioration in their health. So I absolutely take the point. But I think most people would like to have the choice of where they go and have a choice of you know, what time and what date they're seen, rather than just being given a ticket. And
I'm just going to add that as well. I think it's important to say that one of the aims of the review that we're undertaking is looking at providing care closer to people's homes wherever we can, and using new techniques of communication and so forth, which don't require people to go to hospital. So in the past, our ways of working have been limited to looking after people in hospital beds and seeing people in outpatient appointments. And more we're looking at ways of remotely reviewing patients. So we have systems where nurses go out into the community, can look at a patient's wound after they've had an operation and report back, which saves that person having to visit the hospital at all. And we've now got some technology which allows us to do similar things, so that using a sort of almost like a FaceTime technology, you can do the same thing. So I think, there's quite a lot of discussion about how the voluntary sector can help with these developments, and I think your idea is a really good one. But actually, we're trying to reduce the need for people to shuttle backwards and forwards as well.
Yes, sir. Hang on. Oh, Joel, there you go.
Rufus Gilbert, Devon County Council Health and Wellbeing Scrutiny. Obviously, National Health Service has come before us quite a lot in the past, so fairly well informed. But what we need to do is, what you're really angling for, is to get people out of hospitals back into the community, care in the community as fast as possible. As we all know, there's lots of people in hospital that don't need to be in hospital. They're not acute and they shouldn't be there. Now, so that's getting to the nub of it. 30,000 bed nights are lost in Devon in hospitals, a huge number. So what are you going to do? If you get your patients out of the hospitals into the community again, that's brilliant. But the theory plans are brilliant, as so often health plans in theory are absolutely brilliant, but when you come to put them into practice, they struggle to survive. And one of the reasons for that is because little is thought about where are you going to recruit the staff to look after the people in the community? Where are these skills going to come from? High cost housing, little housing, high cost of living here, small salaries, the same old problem, you can't recruit the staff. So it fails. So often these policies fail when they're super policies. So I'd like you to take us through how you're going to get the care in the community to work. Bearing in mind we're leaving the European Union and we don't seem to want anybody to come over here to help out, it's going to put additional stress within the UK to train these people over and above what we've had to date. Can you reassure me that you will be looking into all these matters?
In a sense, I think that's probably more part of the community integration consultation which has been going on, but it absolutely links into the acute services because we can't reduce the pressure. One of the ways of reducing the pressure on the acute services is to do more in the community, so it does link up. It's absolutely, we need to be sure that there are going to be sufficient people to look after patients in the community rather than in hospitals. I can talk about what we've been doing in South Devon and making sure that we have enough people and trying to build that workforce is part of the strategy. It's important to say, though, that the other part of the strategy is that what we've done over the years is encourage a bit of dependency. And part of the strategy for community services in South Devon, and I know it's exactly the same in the rest of Devon, is to encourage people to take more responsibility for their own care and also to make the best use of the voluntary services that we have in the community that are really keen to do more and haven't always been encouraged and integrated with the statutory health and care services. And all I can say is that in South Devon, where we're perhaps a little bit ahead of the community service development in the rest of Devon, we've seen better outcomes this winter than we did last. So we've had less patients stuck in hospital and able to get out than we did last year, and actually we've had some of the best figures in the country. So I think there is some evidence that it can work. I think in North Devon also there's some similar experience with, after closing some beds in North Devon, they've had similar experience too. So it is absolutely important. We're going to have to keep a very close eye on it, but I don't think it's impossible, and I think we've got some evidence that it's already working.
Hello, I'm Colin Pincombe, Chair of South Hams Hospital League of Friends. I've got a question which might be better answered by a CCG person if there is one here, or maybe you could handle it. The decisions that were made recently about closing hospitals in East Devon and subsequently South Devon were predicated on having an independent assessment panel or assurance panel to ensure that the staff that Rufus has been talking about in the community actually exist before community hospitals are closed. These are community nurses and social workers. This, to me, seemed to be an important part of the process because those of us on the outside were worried that there were a lot of wishful thinking that care at home could take place. Could somebody elaborate on how that system will work and from the point of view of the independents, what members will be on the panel? Thank you.
So I can't give you specific details yet, and I don't think that there are any details to give you. So the decision that was made last week was the decision based on the two business cases, the pre-consultation business case and the decision-making business case, to proceed to plan to close those beds in the Eastern Devon area. The next step is the implementation stage, and that's the stage where we are at the moment. So we have no specific plan to implement that, and we cannot go ahead and implement it until we have got all of those assurances. So you're absolutely right. There is still very much work to be done, and I can't give you chapter and verse about what that will look like because I don't know. I'm either not sufficiently involved or it hasn't been done yet, and I suspect it's the latter. But yes, you're absolutely right. There will be need to have those assurances, make sure those staff are in place, that they're trained, that they're happy. It's a massive piece of work, in fact, but we hope to be able to address it at pace, really, because we know that we need to make these changes and fast.
just a little bit about South Devon, because we, as I say, we're a little bit further ahead. There are two things that have happened of independence. We had an assessment from the Southwest Clinical Senate, which is an independent body made up predominantly of doctors, nurses, therapists, and so forth. And I know that the rest of Devon, the new Devon CCG, had a similar assessment about whether the plans that we were making were credible and whether there was evidence that we had staff in place. So there's that element of independence. But the decision about whether we had sufficient staff in place in the community has actually been made by the CCG in South Devon. So we have now got the go-ahead from South Devon CCG to make those hospital closures that have been proposed. I have to say, Sarah has been very particular about needing assurance that the services are in place. So there's an element of independence there in that we've got external eyes on us very much to assure that to give assurance that those services are in place.
Thank you. I'm Sarah Wollaston, the local MP, and also happen to chair the Health Committee in Parliament, and we're going to be undertaking an inquiry specifically into STP, so I was very interested to see how these sessions are going. Just further to Colin's point, you might be interested to see the comments that Simon Stevens, the head of the NHS, has made this week about those kinds of assurances, because he is proposing that those are tightened. And I know the concerns that I've expressed to South Devon have been that Torbay Hospital is already running at 92 to 94% bed occupancy rates. And so although this might be a relatively smooth transition as we move into the summer months, my concern is, you know, what's going to happen then when we move into winter, when we know a lot more sick, frail, elderly people in particular are admitted. Anyway, I'm very happy to talk to anyone afterwards about wider things about STPs and Parliament and listen to any views that you want to give me, and to talk a little bit about some of the things in the budget relating to STPs, but it's not the purpose of this meeting. So I'm here in my capacity as a local representative today, and I just wanted to ask a question to you that comes very frequently to me in my post bag, and that is the fact that local communities tell me time and again they want services that are closer to home. But by that they don't just mean the sort of local things like a clinic appointment. What they mean by that is they don't want to have to travel a long way, as you have said earlier, for things like if somebody they love has a stroke. But then there's another side to that, and that is that as much more complex treatments are available, including increasingly things like clot retrieval, we know that you can only deliver those in really specialist centres. And so it may be that it's safer for you, for your ambulance to take you past your local hospital to the specialist centre. So how do you propose to go about balancing, when you're listening to communities' views, listening to them that they want it close to home, but also explaining that sometimes actually it's in your best interest to travel further away immediately, but then to have your rehabilitation close to home? And I just wondered how you're going to handle that very difficult balance, Rob.
Yeah, thank you. There's a slide actually that describes, I've got the clicker, let me take it back, describes the criteria for that one, yeah. And I think this feeds into it really. Certainly in the maternity review, we've had a lot of conversations about how we can provide care closer to home. In maternity care, we try to actually make it less medical. It's a normal process. It's a healthy women in the main, and we want to make it less medical, really. So we really want to provide the majority of the care as close to home as possible. And if we can, through this review, if we can move that actually closer to people's homes, that would be great. There are some aspects of care, though, and for some women who have high-risk pregnancies, where there is no question they should be looked after in a specialist centre. And for some women, when explained the reasons for that, will be very happy to go to a centre further away than their local obstetric unit because they recognise that risk. And I think the key is getting people back to their home base as quickly as possible. And again, the stroke example is a good one because, as you say, you may need to go to the specialist centre for 24, 48, 72 hours, but then the rehabilitation can be provided close to home. And I think the key is thinking about the safety aspects. We, in the maternity review, and paediatric review, we felt that of all these criteria, the most important was safety. So we couldn't, as clinical staff, as doctors and nurses and therapists and midwives, we couldn't recommend a change in service that would make patients less safe. We recognised that quality and access and so forth were close behind in terms of their priority, but the absolute priority was safety. And hopefully you would agree with that. But in each of the reviews, the balance of those criteria may be slightly different. And I think we're going to have to accept that we may have to give a little on access for safety in some of these reviews. But that's the way we're going about it, is determining which are the key criteria.
No, I think actually that people do understand that you can't have experts who are experts at everything. So, GP's knowledge is a mile wide but an inch thick. You wouldn't want your GP taking your appendix out, but you'd be very happy for them to manage their diabetes and hypertension and so on. So the more specialised something becomes, the more people understand, I think, that in order for a specialist to stay expert at doing something, they need to be doing a lot of them. So a cardiac surgeon who does 3 heart bypasses a year is not going to be operating on me because he or she isn't doing enough. And I think people get that. But you're right, I think we need to be able to articulate that really clearly.
I think, if I could just add one more thing to that, we're also, some of the other smaller reviews that we're doing, neurology is a good example. We're looking at the way that we can spread the provision of some of these smaller specialties across Devon, and we can do that if we're working together as 4 trusts working together. We can do that more easily than we can if a service is just run from one hospital, where you might expect then patients to have to travel to that one hospital. So that's another example of the sort of thing we're trying to do.
I think this really isn't a question, it's an underlining of what we've been talking about. My real worry is about the inability to produce the staff who will make this possible. The common factor of your 3 areas of work, your 3 priority areas, is the difficulty in recruiting staff. Now that is recruiting healthcare staff who have relatively reasonable salaries, reasonable security, reasonable training, failing to come to one of the nicest counties in the country. It's going to be multiply more difficult to recruit community staff who we know are going to be paid at the bottom of the scale. Or you only have to look at residential care, home care, any of them. I think it's really ambitious. I mean, what worries me is we're short of healthcare staff, so we can't get people. We need to get people into the community. We haven't got people in the community. The pressure on the CCG and the trusts is to close beds, and you say that you have already reached the decision and it's now implementation. My experience goes back to care in the community some 20, 30 years ago, where people were absolutely poured out of the big mental health hospitals into the community and landed up on the streets in seaside towns with exploitative landladies living on their own in a much, much worse condition. No accountability anywhere. And I really worry that we're heading headlong to the same situation without enough staff, enough qualified staff, unaccountable people. And the only other thing I'd say, and I'm sorry to be such an Eeyore, but I do worry about this wishful thinking that's going on, is we have recently tried to help a young woman with a child, single parent, and I have been completely appalled every service, whether it was in job seekers, whether it was housing benefit, whether it was CAB, every service has been hollowed out, losing paid staff, depending on well-meaning but often inexperienced and exhausted volunteers. And I have a terrible feeling that that's happening in the community already. I don't know where you're going to find the people to make this great vision work. And I feel it's highly risky. And the only thing I would plead is that you put a longer time scale on it.
Do you want to respond?
Well, yes. I agree. I think we all have those concerns. And in fact, the clinicians have been particularly concerned about that. That's not to say that the managers haven't been, Phil, but you know, that is something that the clinicians have said time and time again. There are some examples of where we as a community haven't necessarily done things the right way. We are looking at every possible aspect of this. We've got Health Education England looking at how we can train people and retrain people. We're going to be looking at it very closely, and I'm sure that my colleagues would agree.
Yeah, and I think I think it's important to realise that when people are in hospital beds, they're only there for a relatively short period of time. So actually it doesn't make that much difference to the provision of care in the community, because when people leave community beds, they would need the same level of support that they needed if the community bed wasn't there. Yes. But what I'm saying is that having the beds makes less difference than you would think, because they will end up in that position anyway. So we've got to do it anyway, and I absolutely agree with you that that is a key challenge, and it's not an easy one. But we are working at looking at different ways of trying to make those jobs more attractive to people, to young people particularly in the community, to get away from some of the zero-hour contracts and the difficulties that people had with not being paid for getting between clients and so forth when they are caring. So and making and developing a structure and an educational career path for people, so it's a more attractive option as a job. And I think that that's the sort of thing we're going to have to do. And agreed.
If I get Phil to respond, and I'll do two more, and then we'll go into the sort of same conversation. I'd really like to get that.
So all of your points around workforce are fantastically well made. It's really obvious, isn't it? And it will take time to define the roles that we need in these new models, and to either move existing staff into those roles, or to somehow work with universities and other healthcare providers to train those staff. I mean, a slightly less sort of bed community hospital-based comment I would make would be, and we can absolutely find a way to make sure that the staff we currently have can work better together. So one of the things I'm really interested in at Derriford is how do we help our hospital doctors work much better with our general practice GPs. So we do have staff at the moment who I think could work better together by trying to get rid of some of these boundaries that we've got, these artificial things around organisations. So that comment's not specific about community hospitals, but I do think there's something in that actually we can do better with the resource that we have at the moment as well. But the comments that you make around workforce are really well made and are very well understood as well within the STP.
Just quickly, we at the county, as you know, most of our money, half of our money, goes into care in the community. So we are your partners in many ways, and we just don't have enough money. 1 in 5 people in Devon are 65 years old, going to get worse. So have you considered taking over the care in the community? Cutting out, it shouldn't be 2 people, really, two partners. Why is the county involved in this? Why can't the National Health Service look after the people? You take the money that we've got, you can have the money, and then look after them to the end, instead of trying to get them out of your hospitals, which is quite understandable, and then they're chocked up because we can't look after them because we haven't got any money and we haven't got the facilities, so they stay in your beds, and it's a vicious circle, right? And we can't play our part because we're underfunded. what about considering, which we have at scrutiny, one point, which is interim care, not a hospital, not necessarily a Kingsbridge hospital, which is really important to the community where they're needed. But there are times where they just want to get them out of your hospitals. They just need a bed. Well, we find ways for social services to get them back into the community. There's actually nothing wrong with them, particularly, but of an age. But they're in your hospitals. What about an interim care homes, not residential, interim care homes? And I'd like your comments on whether the National Health Service should look after the patient from beginning to end. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very happy to answer that one because I think the answer is absolutely yes. And yes to the answer that we should be involved. We should share the care from beginning to end. I absolutely agree. And of course, in South Devon, we are in the fortunate position, I believe, in that we have that to a slightly variable extent because in Torbay we have delegated responsibility from Torbay Council for social care. In the other half of our patch, which is the Devon half, we don't have quite the same, but the aim is the same. And we have very close working relationships between social care and health. And I can tell you it makes a big difference. If you have control, may sound like the wrong word, but if you have control of the whole of the journey from hospital out back into the community, it makes a big difference to how you can manage, and it really means that you do use the staff and the resources that you've got more effectively. So I would absolutely agree with that. In terms of the other comment, I suppose not so much, we don't have intermediate care homes, but we have intermediate care, which is doing what you're describing really. So it's looking after people who are not medically unwell, and don't need to be in a hospital bed, but need some rehabilitation or a little bit more support for a limited period of time. And that's what we have invested in, and that's what's being planned to invest in the community, through the community consultation across the whole STP, to provide that intermediate level of care. And some of that's in care homes and some of that's in people's own homes.
Lose anybody or anything.
Yeah, about the stroke services, what is the model? Because it strikes me that if you have a stroke up in North Devon and maybe you need to be rushed to Derriford because that's the most appropriate place, well, first of all, the ambulance, that has a knock-on effect on the ambulance services, which are already stretched. Do the dispatchers know, or what is the model? Do you phone up and say I need to go to Derriford? How would that work?
Specifics about what will happen, because that we don't know that yet. But what I can tell you is that we actually work really closely with the ambulance service. I have another job where I am a clinical lead for intermediate and urgent care for the southwest of England. And so from that perspective, I can tell you that there is an awful lot of work going on with NHS England, with the ambulance providers, to look at, and the out-of-hours GPs and 111, to make sure that those pathways are as smooth as possible, so that we're just in the process of doing an ambulance review as well, so we make sure that the most appropriate response occurs and that it's the most timely response. And that also means that we don't send a bunch of blue light ambulances to people that don't need it, which is also a waste of resource and very dangerous on the roads as well, both for the other drivers and the paramedics as well. So that is all being looked at, and I think it's probably impractical to say that somebody in North Devon having a stroke will be put in an ambulance and driven 2 hours in a blue light ambulance to Derriford. Yes, exactly, because there is a 1 hour important time that those patients need to get to stroke to needle time, I believe it's called. So that's that, and that's one of the things that we'll look at is, you know, what are the safety criteria, what's the practical, and we'll have to look at all of that in the round for each service, which is why it's not simply a case of saying, well, you know, scratch that because it's too expensive and scratch that because we can't staff it. It's very much about looking at each service.
Future clinicians and care professionals, have you actually talked to the care professionals that you have at the moment? Because the ones I've spoken to are not very happy. And most of them are leaving if they possibly can have somewhere else to go. My husband's a doctor at Derriford. He's been taking exams until he was 35. Obviously has an enormous amount of training, expertise, professionalism. But, you know, he's just one of them who finds that the extra stress, not the medical part of working under the NHS, because he loves that. It's the extra stress of not being able to park, being treated appallingly, not having enough equipment. So never mind talking about getting new people, how are you going to keep the people you've got and make them happier with higher morale? And then perhaps talk about getting some new people in, because at the moment there's 12% are from EU places who are obviously feeling very insecure at the moment. And as my husband says, they work very hard and are very caring and sympathetic. And it just seems to me that you're trying to run. Have you actually spoken to your present staff to see how you can help them and how they feel it could be run in the future and keep staff retention?
Well, the workshops that we've... Sorry, that was a bit loud, wasn't it? The workshops that we've been doing have had staff from all of our acute hospitals, and those staff have been... I believe the departments have been invited to decide who they send themselves, and those staff really do have a role in making sure that they bring the views of those colleagues that they work with every day. Rob, you were leading one of those.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the things that you're saying, I would suggest, are about the national situation and not really under our control as even as fairly senior people in the system in Devon. Having said that, but the training, you know, the new training regulations and new junior doctors' contracts and so forth are determined at national level, and of course the funding is determined at national level. Now I'm sure everybody in the STP would say we would like more resources, and we need more resources, but that doesn't alter the fact that we have to do our very best with the resources that we've got. And I think there are ways that we can, using the resources better, could also improve experience for staff in the NHS. We know there's still quite a bit of duplication between staff because we don't have good communications across the different sectors. If we can improve that, that will improve people's, take the pressure off people. If we can work together as hospitals to provide joint on-call arrangements or whatever, which takes the pressure off the frequency of on-call for doctors, nurses and therapists and so forth, that again is going to be a good thing. So I think we have to do a bit of both. We'd love it if we would have more resources, but I don't think none of us are relying on that happening to solve our problems.